Hi everyone, Yumi here. This is the FTX Crypto Cup, tournament that was held on 2021 and it's the sixth edition. This is a semi-final match between Magnus Carlsen and Radjabov, Teimour, who is an Azerbaijan #1 grandmaster. In this tournament, the other semi-final was between Wesley So and Nepal, and I'll show those games in the next video. But this was the second game of that match and was such an interesting game. Remember, FTX Crypto Cup tournament has a prize fund that totals to about 320,000 US dollars, and this is inclusive of the Bitcoin bonus of 100,000. And the winner also gets to qualify for the September tour final. It's a rapid time control, 15 plus 10, meaning 15 minutes for all moves with a 10-second increment per move from move 1. It's a knockout matchup, and these knockout matchups are played over 2 days. They just held over 2 days with just 4 games, a match each day. And this was it. If it's a draw, if it's like 1-1, then they go for a blitz game. 2 blitz games of 5 plus 3. And if that continues to proceed, they would then go for Armageddon. Armageddon game is whereby white gets to have 5 minutes to black's 4 minutes, but black's draw is sufficient enough to have him win. Yeah, a draw would count as a win for black. So let's get into the game and see how it started. Again, don't forget to subscribe to my channel or hit the like button just so you can be able to support kids from the hood. So Magnus had the white pieces in this second game of the 4, and Radjabov was having the black pieces. Magnus started with e4, and Radjabov replied with b6, d4 by Magnus, bishop b7. If he unchattels his light squared bishop straight up on move 2, and that's very typical of Radjabov. Bishop d3, we had e6, knight f3, d6, and Magnus castles the king side. Knight d7 and a4. a4, he's on board. Magnus always likes to create space on the queen side in all his games, especially the e4 games. So we have a6, just so he could prevent this bishop from sitting on the b5 square. That, of course, that didn't happen. I was just showing you how this square had to be taken up. So then we had rook e1, knight g to f6. We have knight b to d2, bishop e7. And here, the advantage starts to swing towards white. White's pieces are a bit harmonious. He harmoniously enjoys the position, and that's very typical of Magnus Carlsen. We have knight f1, a repositioning of the knights. These knights are swinging around, and I'm sure this is now coming to 3. It's very typical of Magnus. He swings these knights from, very typical of him, just so he can be able to have minor pieces. Radjabov, however, castled the king side, and we had Magnus play knight g3. e5 is on the board, an assault on the center, and here he plays c3 just to strengthen the d pawn. This strengthens this pawn. If just in case Radjabov ever captures this, then Magnus would recapture. We have rook e8, bishop d2, who is on the board by Magnus, and then we have bishop drawing back to f8. Now, what this move is intended, it's intended to, one, opening up space for this rook, or visibility for this rook, and secondly, He wants to move this bishop to fianchetto it on g7. Just to show you, it will be followed by, he moves this here, he moves this bishop here, and Magnus anticipated that really well. So what he did is he created a battery immediately after g6 was pushed. Let's see how the game went on. So we have b4 first, creating more space on the queen side. g6 is pushed. Now he does create a battery on that diagonal. That's the c1 h6 diagonal, just so he can be able to play this soon as black plays his bishop to g7. You challenge the fianchetto bishop. So the game went on. Bishop g7, and Magnus played fast a5, and Radjabov replied by b5, just so as to close up the position. Bishop h6. Radjabov is not about to entertain taking out his fianchetto bishop. That's a defensive bishop. This is a very defensive bishop. So the best thing you could do was to play it back. Magnus then pushes d5. This move closes up both bishops. This is now almost a bad bishop, and this too is not a very nice bishop sitting on h8. So we have c5. Now you don't want to be picking an impassant here. This is already good enough that you're taking out this bishop. Don't reactivate by picking an impassant. Leave things the way they are there. If he wants to pick and pick, if you want to push, you'll draw back. So white didn't respond to that. He instead just played h6. He just played h6, and very typical of Magnus Carlsen. He's always so calm under such situations. We have c4 on the move and having the bishop under attack, and then the bishop draws back to c2. We have knight f8, queen d2, bishop c8, just so as to make this bishop more useful. Wherever it was on b7, it was a bad bishop, but now that it's on this diagonal, the c8 h3 diagonal, that makes it a much better bishop than before, because it's now looking at this h pawn and that whole diagonal, which is really good. We now have knight h2. This is just reposition the knights. This knight now will perhaps sit here if time be, and it's also clearing way for this pawn, for the f pawn to be pushed. We have bishop back to g7. He's had enough. He just want to take out the h bishop. He's strangling him. He plays rook back to f1. Bishop captures on h6 and queen recaptures on h6. King moves out of the g file way and gets to h8. We have queen back to d2. Knight on 6 to d7. This knight goes back to d7. That's the knight on the 6th f file. We have f4 as anticipated. He pushes the f4 pawn. Now here you have to put in mind that after pushing the f pawn, this knight is not protected, so you have to play with this in mind, just in case it's ever attacked, say by queen h4. However, Radjabov did not play that. He captured on f4, and Magnus recaptured using the rook. So rook recaptures on f4. We have knight e5. The first knight is here. So we have to have the knight on h2 activated, and this is now activated by playing it to f3 to challenge the knight on e5. We have the other knight on f1 coming to d7. We now have a second rook joining to sit behind the knight, and that's rook f1. Knight captures on f3 check, and the knight the rook on 4, and now the rook on 4 captures on f3. We have knight e5. The other knight replaces the one that captured, and now rook has to move out of the way. Now this move was such a bait. He did bait Radjabov, thinking that he could win an exchange in this spot. What he didn't know is that this was a positional sacrifice. He's sacrificing an exchange just to obliterate the king side, and Radjabov did fall for this by playing bishop f5. Now this bishop f5 move on any ordinary day, it creates a blinder. These two rooks are now disjointed. So you like it on this rook has nowhere to go. Magnus could have chosen to capture using the rook, but that wouldn't be good for Magnus. He would just gain a pawn like this. You capture here, he captures, and then perhaps you use the knight or use the rook. Yeah, all that works. You could even recapture using the knight, and you'll have a pawn for that. However, this move was intended just exactly for this, and Magnus captured using the f pawn, and Radjabov happily picked the exchange. However, when this pawn captured on g7, the queen is a discovered attack on the queen. This queen is hit. Where does the queen go? He cannot capture this pawn because it's protected by the bishop. This bishop is watching this whole diagonal, so he cannot do that. What he could do, this queen could not sit here. It could not sit on this square. It can sit on e7 or d8 to go back to its square. But Radjabov decided to have this queen sitting on h4, and here it was subjected to attack by the knight. That's knight f5. Queen is under attack. It moves out of the way. Queen h5. Now, in this very position, Magnus played a move, and this is where everything went well. The game here is almost lost. It's like 7-point lead. So he captured. But before capturing, he pushed this pawn. g7 check. Very good intermediate move to just protect that pawn. King moves to g7, to g8 rather. King moves to g8. Magnus then captures, attacking the rook. Rook moves out of its way while attacking the knight. That's rook e to d8. Magnus moves back with his knight back to f5. And now Radjabov pushes f6. At this point, Magnus realized that this king was almost being checkmated. So he did just create one more space for the queen to give a check, and that was through pushing d6. To prevent this, Radjabov played his rook to a7, just so when he's checked, he's able to block with the rook. But blocking with the rook is a bad move. Rather, you block queen. And in this position, Radjabov, even blocking with the queen would be bad, because then you would have knight checking you and forking queen and king. So this queen here cannot leave this square. So what happens is Magnus checks. Radjabov, since he realized he cannot block using the queen, because then if you block with the queen, just so demonstrate that if you block here with the queen like this, knight checks and forks queen and king. However, when the queen stays on the h file and you block with the rook like this rook has cut off the queen from drawing back to this diagonal. So it literally has only this square and this square to survive. So at this point, Magnus seizes this opportunity and plays bishop d1, and it was in this position after 39 moves that Radjabov resigned. Because let's see if he'd played a move like this, queen g6. Here the queen would fall instantly, immediately by this fork. Check. The knight forks the queen and king. Perhaps king would have to move here, and he would lose the queen. Now, let's see if, what if he played, let's take it back. What if he played queen g5? In this position, h4 would be sufficient, and then we would be having queen c1, and here we would then have bishop h5, and queen is under attack. It cannot draw back to here, cannot play here. The best you can play here is perhaps either here or here, but in this position you lose an exchange. Fast as an exchange, they will fork you. It's very obvious. You will get forked. You will get forked. You have to pick this. Then they pick this. After they pick this, you're literally lost. You are lost here. You are lost. You can say to move away. You can say to move the other way around. But there is another line, just change of order of moves, where rather than forking immediately, you would pick here in check, and then black would recapture back on f7, and this is when you check them, force them to pick this, then you would check them here. Check. Queen captures on f7. You have only one move. Which good move here is your capture on h6. Queen captures on f7, check. There are many ways you can block to avoid the checkmate, but after you play that, then the rook falls. At this point, it was all over, and Magnus proceeds to the final.